In France, there is a village where 642 people were murdered in a single afternoon. The government never tore it down. They left every burned car, every collapsed roof, every child's shoe exactly where it fell. And it has stayed that way for over 80 years. If that did not just stop your breath, keep watching, because that is only number 1. Hit the like button right now and subscribe to La Belle Histoire, because by the time we reach number 1 tonight, you will never look at France the same way again. Turn on that notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Most people think of France and they picture the Eiffel Tower, croissants, lavender fields, champagne, but there is another France that the travel guides never show you. A France of silent ruins and ghost villages, of towns abandoned overnight, of places where tragedy struck so hard that even nature hesitates to reclaim what was lost. Hidden in mountain valleys, swallowed by forests, crumbling on clifftops, and sitting perfectly preserved under a poisoned sky, these are the places France forgot. Or in some cases, deliberately chose never to forget. Tonight we're counting down 12 of the most incredible abandoned places in France. From a beach resort left to the sea overnight, to a medieval village sold at auction for less than a Paris apartment, to a town frozen in time by one of the worst massacres in European history. Some of these stories will shock you, some will break your heart, and at least one of them will make you question everything you thought you knew about modern France. We start at number 12, and it only gets darker from here. Number 12, Plage, Normandy, the beach resort that woke up empty. We begin on the coast of Normandy with a story that feels almost too strange to be real. Plage was a modest 1970s holiday resort built right on the beach. Bungalows, a small hotel, shops selling ice cream and postcards. Families from across France came here every summer to feel the Atlantic breeze and forget their troubles for a week. Then, almost overnight, it was abandoned. The reasons were a combination of coastal erosion, rising sea levels, and the simple economic reality that maintaining a resort on a retreating coastline was no longer viable. One by one, the businesses closed. One by one, the families stopped coming back. And eventually, the last owner locked the last door and drove away. What happened next is what makes Plage remarkable. Instead of demolition, art happened. A community of artists discovered the ruins and began transforming them. Massive murals appeared on crumbling walls. Sculptures grew from the debris. Broken bungalows became open-air galleries. Today, Plage exists in a strange, beautiful in-between state, part ghost resort, part living artwork, part monument to the French coastline being slowly consumed by the sea. It was built for summer fun. Now it is one of the most haunting art installations in France. And trust us, what is coming next makes Plage look cheerful by comparison. Number 11, Vierupt, Lorraine, the village the industrial age forgot. Lorraine in northeastern France was once the beating industrial heart of the country. Steel mills, coal mines, iron foundries, towns built around industry, sustained by industry, and ultimately destroyed by industry. Vierupt tells that story with painful clarity. This small village in the Vosges Mountains was never large. A few hundred people at its peak. Farmers, craftsmen, a miller, a blacksmith. The kind of community that had existed in these valleys for centuries. But the 20th century was brutal to small French villages. First, the men left for the First World War. Many never returned. Then the Second World War stripped away what remained. Then the economic miracle of post-war France pulled the young people toward cities and factory jobs with wages the countryside simply could not match. By the 1970s, Vierupt was effectively empty. Today it is a collection of extraordinary stone ruins in a breathtaking forest valley. The church still stands, missing its roof but retaining an eerie dignity. Stone farmhouses are being slowly consumed by tree roots and moss. The old mill wheel is still there, frozen mid-turn, waiting for water that no longer flows with purpose. Nature is patient in Lorraine. It knows it will win eventually. Number 10, Via Gaucinville near Paris, the suburb that a plane crash killed. Here is something extraordinary. 20 kilometers north of the Eiffel Tower, close enough that on a clear day you could theoretically see the Paris skyline, there is a village frozen in 1973. Lace curtains still hang in windows, an old bookstore somehow never fully closed. Rusty cars sit exactly where their owners parked them over 50 years ago. What happened to Via Gaucinville? Two things. And each one was devastating. First, Charles de Gaulle Airport was built nearby. The noise was catastrophic, constant, unbearable. Planes roared overhead every few minutes from dawn until long after midnight. The sound alone was enough to drive people away. But then came June 3, 1973. During the Paris Air Show, a Soviet aircraft suffered a catastrophic structural failure during its demonstration flight and broke apart in the air directly above Gaucinville. The wreckage killed all crew members aboard the plane. It also killed people on the ground in the village itself and destroyed several homes. That was the end of WWII as a living community. The few residents who had stayed through the airport noise left almost immediately after the crash. Today, only a tiny handful of stubborn souls remain. The rest of the village simply stands there, silent, 20 minutes from one of the most visited cities on Earth, and almost nobody knows it exists. Next up, a village emptied by the government itself, deliberately, legally, and without apology. Number 9, Celles near Lac du Salagou. The town drowned for a lake that never filled. In the Hérault region of southern France, beside the beautiful rust-red shores of Lac du Salagou, sits one of the most bittersweet abandoned places in the country. Celles was a living village, a real community, farmers who had worked the same land for generations, families who had been neighbors for centuries, a church, a school, a town hall, a way of life. In the 1960s, the French government decided to build a massive dam and reservoir in this valley. The plan was simple and brutal. Buy the village, move the people, flood everything. The residents were compensated and relocated. Their homes were left standing because the rising waters would take care of demolition naturally. Except the water never rose high enough. The lake filled to a level that left most of the village above the waterline. The homes the government had promised would disappear beneath blue water instead sat exposed, crumbling, abandoned, and visible to anyone who drove along the lakeside road. A community destroyed for a flood that never came. Today, the ruins of Celles sit beside one of the most strikingly beautiful lakes in France. The old church and town hall still stand like sentinels guarding a ghost. Nature has moved in aggressively, vines through windows, trees through rooftops, wildflowers through floors. And the people who were moved away, they never came back. You have not heard heartbreaking yet. Number 8 is coming. Number 8, Broves, Provence. The village the army took and never gave back. Imagine being told to pack your belongings, leave your home, leave your village because the military needs your land. That is exactly what happened to the residents of Broves in 1974. This beautiful 15th century Provençal village sat on the Cangiers Plateau in the Var department of southeastern France. Farmers and shepherds had worked this land for 500 years. The village had its church, its fountain, its ancient stone houses worn smooth by centuries of Mediterranean sun and wind. Then the French army decided it needed the Cangiers Plateau for the largest military training ground in Western Europe. Every resident received notice to leave. The army was thorough. They even relocated the graves from the village cemetery, moving the dead alongside the living. The military still controls the land today. You cannot simply walk to Broves. You need permission. It sits behind fences and military warning signs. But here is the detail that makes this story truly haunting. Once a year on Pentecost Monday, the army opens the gates. Former residents, their children, and their grandchildren are allowed back for a single day. They walk through the ruins. They find the houses where they grew up. They share photographs and stories with people who share the same loss. And then at sunset, they must leave again. A village that gets one ghostly reunion with its past every year. And then the gates close again. We are halfway through our list and it is about to get significantly darker. Coming up, a village where every baby born in a single year died. A medieval ghost town sold at auction with a buyer who met a mysterious end. And the number 1 abandoned place in France that the French government deliberately chose never to rebuild. Keep watching. You will not want to miss what is coming. Number 7, Châteauneuf-les-Moustiers, Verdun. The village Progress walked past. Some villages are destroyed by war, some by flood, some by government decree. Châteauneuf-les-Moustiers was destroyed by a road. This hilltop village in the Verdun Gorge region of Provence was once genuinely thriving. Over 500 residents, 2 schools, a market, a castle. The kind of complete self-sufficient medieval community that had sustained itself for over 1,000 years. Then in the early 19th century, engineers built a new road through the valley below. Not through the village, past it. Travelers who previously stopped at Châteauneuf-les-Moustiers for food, shelter, and trade now passed by on the valley road without ever looking up at the hilltop. The market collapsed. The commerce died. Young people left for towns with actual economic futures. Water became increasingly scarce on the hilltop without the investment that trade income would have funded. The last resident locked his door for the final time in 1932. Today the castle ruins watch over an empty valley. Wildflowers push through flagstone floors. Roofs have opened to the sky like slow motion surrenders to gravity. A 1,000-year-old community destroyed not by catastrophe but by a road that went the wrong way. Sometimes progress is the most destructive force of all. Number 6, Périllos, Pyrénées-Orientales, the mountain village where the Bobbies died. High in the rugged mountains of the Pyrenees-Orientales, just a few kilometers from the Spanish border, sits a hamlet so small that at its peak it housed barely 100 people. Perillos. The name itself sounds like a warning, and the history of this place suggests that maybe it was. The village dates back to the 11th century. Perched on a dramatic rocky outcrop, it commanded views over the surrounding mountains that were strategically valuable in medieval times. But strategic value does not put food on the table. Life in Perillos was always hard. Wars swept through the region repeatedly over the centuries. The vineyards that sustained the community were periodically devastated by disease and harsh winters. Isolation made everything more difficult and more expensive. Then came 1912. In a single year, in this tiny community of barely 100 souls, every baby born in the village died before reaching their first birthday. Historians have never fully explained why. Disease, malnutrition, contaminated water, all have been suggested, but the exact cause remains unclear. What is clear is the psychological devastation that followed. A community that had already been weakened by centuries of hardship suffered something it could not recover from. By the time the Second World War arrived, only 33 people remained in Perillos. The last inhabitant was a shepherd named Aim. He stayed long after everyone else had gone, tending his flock on the rocky hillsides, living alone in the ruins of what had once been a community. Aim finally walked away in 1978. Today the old Roman church still stands, and a handful of houses have been gently restored by artists attracted to the dramatic isolation. The silence is extraordinary, the kind of silence that feels loaded with the weight of everything that happened here. 1,000 years of human life on a rocky mountain, ended by a year that took all its children. Number 5. Saint-Symphorien, Provence. The village that survived everything then quietly gave up. There is something particularly devastating about a place that survives the unsurvivable, only to be quietly finished off by ordinary life. Saint-Symphorien is that place. This small village deep in the forested mountains of the Var department in Provence endured things that would have destroyed lesser communities many times over. The Black Death came through and took a significant portion of the population. The village survived. Cholera followed centuries later. The village survived. Brigand attacks during the lawless periods of French history targeted isolated mountain communities like this one. The village survived. It survived the First World War, which took many of the young men but left the community structure intact. It survived the Second World War, which brought occupation and disruption but did not destroy the village physically. What Saint-Symphorien could not survive was the post-war economic miracle. When France industrialized rapidly after 1945, cities offered wages that the mountain countryside simply could not compete with. Factory jobs, apartment buildings, cinemas, social lives, everything that young people wanted was in Marseille, Toulon, Nice. Not in a remote mountain village with a difficult road and no economic future. One by one the young people left. The older generation died, the houses emptied, and a village that had outlasted plague, war, and lawlessness was finally defeated by the simple human desire for a better life somewhere else. The ruins of Saint-Symphorien sit in extraordinary forest scenery today. Beautiful to visit, heartbreaking to understand. Number 4 is even stranger. A medieval village put up for auction sold for less than the price of a Paris apartment to a mysterious buyer whose story ended in tragedy and unanswered questions. Number 4. Courbevoie, Haute-Vienne. The village with a mysterious new owner and an unsolved story. In 2012, an unusual auction took place in France. An entire medieval village, houses, church, outbuildings, surrounding land was offered for sale as a single lot. The village was Courbevoie in the Haute-Vienne department of southwestern France. It had been abandoned for decades, its stone buildings slowly returning to the earth in the way that stone buildings do when no one maintains them. The asking price was 500,000 euros. For context, the average Paris apartment at the time cost more than that, an entire French medieval village, for the price of a flat in the 15th arrondissement. The buyer was a wealthy South Korean photographer and businessman. He had grand plans. Courbevoie would become an international artists' colony, a creative retreat where painters, sculptors, and photographers from around the world could live and work in the extraordinary peace of the French countryside. It was a beautiful vision. It never happened. Back in South Korea, the buyer became entangled in one of the country's most devastating tragedies, the Sewol ferry disaster of 2014, in which over 300 people, most of them schoolchildren, drowned when a ferry capsized. He was a major shareholder in the company that owned the ferry. South Korean authorities issued a warrant for his arrest on charges related to the disaster and the subsequent cover-up. He was never arrested. His body was found in a field in southern France in June 2014, weeks after the ferry disaster. The exact circumstances of his death were never fully clarified. Courbevoie still sits in the French countryside, still waiting for the artist's colony that was promised. Still surrounded by unanswered questions about its mysterious owner who bought a medieval village and then disappeared from history in the most dramatic way imaginable. Number 3 will disturb you in a completely different way. We are moving into France's red zone, land so poisoned by the First World War that it has been declared permanently uninhabitable. And one of the ghost villages within it technically still exists as a legal municipality, with 0 residents, and it always will. Number 3, Cumières-le-Mortham Meuse, the village that France declared dead forever. The name Mortham means dead man. It was not always called that, but after what happened here between 1916 and 1918, no other name seemed appropriate. Cumières-le-Mortham sits within what the French call the Zone Rouge, the Red Zone. A vast area of northeastern France, surrounding the former battlefield of Verdun where the fighting during the First World War was so intense, so sustained, and so saturated with chemical weapons and unexploded ordnance, that the French government concluded it could never safely be returned to civilian use. The soil in the red zone contains arsenic, lead, zinc, mercury, and residue from poison gas shells at concentrations thousands of times higher than any standard for human safety. It also contains an estimated 12 million unexploded shells, including roughly 3 million that contain live chemical agents. Every year in France, people are killed or injured by First World War munitions that surface from the ground. The estimated timeline for complete clearance of the red zone at the current rate of work is 700 years. Cumières-le-Mortham was a real village before the war, a community of farmers on the banks of the Meuse River. In 1914, it had a church, a school, a mairie, and a population of several hundred people who had lived in this valley for generations. By 1918, it had been shelled into non-existence. Not damaged, not partially destroyed, obliterated. The village ceased to exist physically. France made a remarkable and permanent decision. 9 villages in the Verdun battle zone, including Cumières-le-Mortham, would be officially maintained as municipalities. They would have elected officials called trustees who carry out the administrative functions of a village government, but they would never have residents, ever. These 9 villages exist in French law as permanent memorials. Their populations are listed as 0 on every census. They will remain 0 forever. Cumières-le-Mortham is a village that France officially declared dead and then kept alive as a legal entity so that it could never be forgotten. A place that died for France. It was never allowed to come back. Number 2, the abandoned chateaux of the Creuse, France's valley of forsaken palaces. Most people know that France has more castles and grand manor houses than any other country in Europe. What most people do not know is how many of them are completely abandoned. The Creuse department in the heart of France, a rural, sparsely populated region sometimes called the Forgotten France, contains an extraordinary concentration of abandoned chateaux. Grand manor houses and minor castles that once belonged to noble families, wealthy merchants, and industrial magnates, sitting empty and deteriorating in the French countryside. The reasons vary from property to property. Some lost their owners in the First or Second World War with no heirs surviving to inherit. Others became economically impossible to maintain. The French system of inheritance law, which divides property equally among all children, often resulted in grand estates with dozens of co-owners who could not agree on what to do with an expensive crumbling chateau and simply did nothing. Some were purchased speculatively by foreign buyers who ran out of money before restoration could begin. Others are tied up in legal disputes that have been running for decades. The result is extraordinary and melancholy. Grand staircases leading to collapsed floors. Elaborate plasterwork ceilings open to the sky. Ballrooms with parquet floors that rot slowly in the rain. Libraries with books still on the shelves, their pages fusing together in the damp. France has been trying to address this crisis. Some chateaux have been purchased for symbolic amounts by buyers willing to commit to restoration. Others have been converted to community uses, but hundreds remain empty. Thousands of rooms, centuries of craftsmanship. Slowly returning to earth in the heart of the French countryside, and none of it prepares you for what is coming at number 1. Number 1. Oradour-sur-Glane, Haute-Vienne, the village that France refused to rebuild. June 10, 1944, 4 days after the D-Day landings on the Normandy beaches. 4 days after the most famous military operation in history had finally given occupied France a reason to believe that liberation was coming. On that day, in a peaceful, unremarkable village called Oradour-sur-Glane in the Haute-Vienne department of southwestern France, soldiers from the 2nd SS Panzer Division des Reich arrived in the early afternoon. Oradour-sur-Glane had no military significance. There were no resistance fighters hiding there, no weapons caches, no strategic value of any kind. It was simply a village, 642 people living their ordinary lives in the French countryside. The SS soldiers ordered everyone into the village square. They separated the men from the women and children. The men were taken to barns and outbuildings. The women and children were herded into the church. Then the killing began. The men were shot in the legs to prevent them from running, and then the barns were set on fire. Those who somehow survived the initial shooting and tried to crawl to safety through the flames were shot again. Inside the church, soldiers placed an incendiary device and ignited it. When the women and children tried to escape through the doors and windows, they were shot. The church burned with them inside it. 642 people, in one afternoon, in a village that had done nothing. There was one survivor from the church, a woman named Marguerite Ruffench, who managed to squeeze through a small window behind the altar and drop to the ground outside, where she hid in a garden until nightfall despite being shot 5 times. After the massacre, the soldiers looted the village and burned every building to the ground. When liberation came and France began to process what had happened during the occupation, the new French government faced a decision about Oretter-sur-Glane. They could rebuild it, clear the ruins, construct a memorial and move on, or they could do something else entirely. President Charles de Gaulle visited the ruins in 1945 and made the decision that would define this place forever. Leave it exactly as it is. Not one stone moved, not one burned car removed, not one collapsed roof rebuilt, not one sewing machine, baby carriage, bicycle, or cooking pot taken from the ruins. Everything exactly as the SS soldiers left it on the evening of June 10, 1944. A new village was built nearby for survivors and returnees. The ruins of the original became the Village des Martyrs, the Village of the Martyrs, a permanent open-air memorial to what happened there. A place where every rusted car and every charred wall is an accusation that time is not allowed to soften. Today you can walk through Oretter-sur-Glane. You can see the remains of the church where the women and children died. You can see the burned cars on the street where they were abandoned 80 years ago. You can see the sewing machines in the ruins of the textile workshop. You can see the school, the market hall, the houses, everything exactly as it was. Nothing has been touched. Because France decided that this place should never be allowed to become comfortable, never allowed to become merely historical, never allowed to become something you can look at without feeling the full weight of what happened here. Oretter-sur-Glane is not a ruin. It is a wound that France has chosen to keep open, so that no one ever forgets. 12 places, 12 different stories, 12 different kinds of loss. We began at Pirouplage, a beach resort reclaimed by art and the sea. We visited Villa Gaucinville, a suburb frozen in 1973 by a plane that fell from the sky. We stood at the gates of Broves, a Provencal village the army took and returns to its former residents for just 1 day a year. We counted the bobbies of Perillos who did not survive 1912. We traced the legal boundaries of Cumières-le-Mortham, a village that France declared officially dead and will never allow to be rebuilt. We walked through the abandoned chateaux of the Creuse, grand houses with libraries still full of books that no one will ever read. And we ended where we had to end. In a village in Haute-Vienne where the cars are still parked on the street and the church is still burned and 642 people are still waiting to be forgotten. France will not let them be. These places are not just ruins, they are memory, they are history, they are the parts of France that the postcards never show, and the parts that matter most. Which of these 12 places affected you the most? Was it the village the army took and visits once a year, the community destroyed for a lake that never filled, or Oretter-sur-Glane, the wound France has chosen to keep open? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. If this video took you somewhere unexpected, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to La Belle Histoire and turn on notifications, because next week we go even deeper into the France that history tried to hide. A bientôt.